This is not a ceasefire. This is a power move. And the moment I saw these 6 demands coming out of Iran, I knew something had shifted, because this doesn't feel like diplomacy anymore. It feels like a challenge, a direct challenge to the United States, to Israel, and honestly to the entire balance of power in the Middle East. And if you think this is just another headline that will fade in a few days, you're already missing what's really happening here. Because these demands are not designed to stop a war temporarily. They are designed to end it on Iran's terms. And that's exactly why this situation is becoming so dangerous right now. Because when one side stops negotiating and starts dictating, history tells us things don't calm down. They escalate. I've seen tensions rise before. I've seen threats, sanctions, warnings. But this feels different. This feels like a line being drawn. Because Iran isn't just reacting anymore. It's positioning itself like a power that believes it has leverage. And the first sign of that came with their very first demand, a demand that sounds simple on the surface, but becomes almost impossible the moment you think about it. They want guarantees that this kind of war will never happen again. Not statements, not promises, but binding, enforceable guarantees. And I want you to really think about that for a second. How do you guarantee something like that in one of the most unstable regions in the world? You can't. And that's exactly the point. Because this isn't just a condition, it's pressure. It's a way of forcing the other side into a corner before negotiations even begin. And just when that sinks in, the second demand hits even harder. A complete shutdown of US military bases across the Middle East. And when I read that, I realized this isn't about security anymore. This is about influence. Because those bases represent presence, control, and power. And by asking for their removal, Iran is essentially saying one thing very clearly. The current power structure has to go. And that's not a small ask. That's a complete shift. Because from the Gulf to Iraq, those bases are part of a larger system, and removing them would change the entire strategic map overnight. But if you think that's where it peaks, it doesn't. Because the third demand takes things to a completely different level. War reparations, and this is where I paused, because this flips the narrative entirely. Instead of being seen as a country under pressure, Iran is positioning itself as a country demanding accountability, demanding compensation. And that's not something you usually see in conflicts like this, especially not directed at powers like the US or Israel. And whether you agree with it or not, you can't ignore how bold that move is, because it sends a message that this isn't just about defending, it's about redefining who holds moral ground in this conflict. And just when you think the scope is clear, the fourth demand expands it even further. Iran is calling for an end to all regional wars, including operations against its allied groups. And this is where the situation becomes even more complex. Because now we're not just talking about one battlefield, we're talking about multiple fronts, multiple players, and a demand that could reshape alliances across the entire region. And this is exactly the kind of move that turns a conflict into a larger geopolitical shift. But then comes the moment that really changes everything. The demand that could send shockwaves far beyond the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz. And if you don't understand why this matters, let me make it very clear. Nearly 20% of the world's oil passes through that narrow stretch of water, which means control over it is not just regional power, it's global influence. And Iran is now asking for a new legal structure governing that strait, which in simple terms means reducing Western dominance and increasing its own role. And the moment that happens, everything from oil prices to global trade routes could be affected. And suddenly, this isn't just a regional issue anymore, it becomes a global one. And just when it feels like we've reached the peak, the final demand pushes it into even more controversial territory. Iran is calling for action against what it describes as hostile media, even suggesting extradition of individuals it accuses of spreading anti-Iran narratives. And this is where the conflict moves beyond military and politics into something deeper: control of information, control of narrative. Because in today's world, perception is power, and whoever controls the story often controls the outcome. And when you put all 6 of these demands together, a pattern starts to emerge. And it's not about compromise, it's about reset, a complete geopolitical reset. And that brings us to the most important question. Why now? Why make such bold demands at this exact moment? And the answer isn't simple, but one thing is clear. This is not random. This is calculated. Because no country puts forward demands like this unless it believes it has some kind of advantage, whether that's strategic positioning, regional alliances, or simply the belief that the other side is not in a position to respond strongly. And that belief alone is enough to change the entire dynamic. Because once a side feels confident, it stops reacting and starts dictating. But here's where things get complicated. Because the United States and Israel are not likely to accept these terms. In fact, from where I see it, this creates a dangerous deadlock, because accepting these demands would mean giving up influence, while rejecting them increases the risk of escalation. And history has shown us that this exact situation is where things tend to spiral, because all it takes is one miscalculation, one move too far, and suddenly the entire situation shifts from tension to confrontation. And that's why the Strait of Hormuz becomes the most critical flashpoint in all of this, because it's not just a location, it's a trigger. You can almost picture it. Oil tankers moving slowly through narrow waters, naval ships monitoring every movement, tension building with every passing hour, and everyone watching, waiting. Because if something happens there, the impact won't stay contained. It will spread instantly. Fuel prices could surge, markets could react, and the ripple effects could be felt across the world. And that's not speculation, that's how interconnected everything is right now. And while all of this is unfolding, the world is reacting in real time. Social media is already exploding. Opinions are divided. Some people are calling this a bold strategic move. Others see it as a dangerous escalation. And in the middle of all this noise, one thing becomes clear. No one really knows what happens next. And that uncertainty is what makes this moment so significant. Because moments like this don't just pass quietly, they define what comes next. And I can't shake the feeling that we are watching one of those turning points right now. A moment where the balance of power could shift, where decisions made in the coming days could shape the future of the region for years, maybe even decades. And if these demands are rejected, which is likely, then the question becomes, what comes next? More pressure, more tension, or something much bigger? And that's the part that should concern everyone. Because beyond all the strategy and politics, there are real consequences. Because war is never just about power, it's about people, it's about impact, it's about outcomes that can't always be controlled once things begin to escalate. And that's why this moment matters, not just as a headline, but as a reminder of how fragile stability really is, and how quickly things can change when power is challenged. So now we wait, we watch, and we try to understand where this is heading. Because right now, the world is holding its breath, and the next move could change everything. And if you've stayed with me this far, I want to know what you think. Is this a strategic move by Iran, or the beginning of something much bigger? Because one thing is certain, this story is far from over, and what happens next, you're going to want to see it unfold.